What's going on there, guys? Good morning, good afternoon out there. It's the Earthmaster here on this Wednesday, November 2nd, 2022. It is about 12:30 p.m. California time out here along the West Coast. Quite a bit of earthquake activity ramping up in the last 24 hours, including some activity off the coast of California, well off the coast. And well off the plate boundary here of the Pacific and the North American plate. We've seen a 6.0 earthquake come in to the, there's a little fracture zone out here. I believe this is pretty close to it, the Murray fracture zone. Again, this is obviously oceanic crust out here, and it's well inland from the plate boundary, the 6.0 that struck last night. It's unusual and definitely odd. We don't see too much earthquake activity in this type of fashion away from the plate boundary, but got to remember there might be some older fault systems out there that we don't really know about. There's a couple different fracture zones that sit out here in the Northeast Pacific Basin that can create these intraplate earthquakes. And just one here along the North American plate, away from the plate boundary, for example, is the New Madrid seismic zone. It's a ways away from any plate boundary. And there's a couple other spots around the world where we see earthquakes happen and nowhere near a plate boundary. So occasionally these things do happen. And it's kind of cool to see and also kind of cool to learn from as well. I haven't heard anything from the USGS yet in terms of their thoughts on it. Let me double check though. Again, this earthquake came in last night. I guess a few folks did report feeling it along the West Coast in California. The Did You Feel It reports looks like a few folks reported feeling it. But then again, we did have some activity kind of kicking up following that 6-pointer along the West Coast. So it may have been a localized earthquake that folks have felt. And not the 6-pointer that was set off the coast here, almost 1,000 miles away. Maybe not that far, but definitely a few hundred miles from the land. Nothing showing up on the USGS map as noted. Now, the fracture zone of this area, the Murray fracture zone, kind of shows you the direction here of the movement of the fault. There's a couple other fracture zones as noted here along the Pacific plate, the Eastern Pacific here. And the 6-pointer that struck is roughly within this zone right here of the Murray fracture zone. So I believe that's exactly where that thing had kicked off at last night. I did pull up the 4.0 earthquake map and above over the last, I think I put since 1100. But, I just wanted to make sure we get all the records in here. And specifically set up a area here in a little square fashion to pick up just general earthquake activity, specifically within this zone where we've seen a 6-pointer, where we seen the 6-pointer last night. And looking at historical data, we did see some 4s, including a 5 or so, roughly within this area. A couple 5s out here off the coast of California, dating back to the 1931 for that one, and then also 1982 for this one over here around this seamount. There's a couple different seamounts out here. Someone may have mentioned that it was volcanic activity. I did look on Google Earth for a little bit more well-defined image here of the oceanic crust. And I'm not seeing any specific seamounts or any bulges that would indicate any magma, uplifting the land here. So not so certain on that. I believe it's purely plate dynamics here along this fracture zone, just shy of this fracture zone called the Murray fracture zone here. And as you can see, there's a couple earthquakes around this area, but by far this is the biggest one, at least the biggest one we've recorded. Who's to say, prior to this, prior to having seismograph stations all over the world and throughout the area, that there hasn't been 6-pointers or fives, prior to all this monitoring equipment that we have set up now, sophisticated equipment. So just a little uncertainty, out there as to how often this happens, what it means, and exactly what fracture zone it happened on. It's kind of in an odd area. When I seen it come in last night, I was like, whoa, what is going on out here? That's an earthquake way away from the plate boundary. That doesn't make sense. But then again, you got to remember New Madrid zone, and I'm sure there's other fault systems on land and in the oceanic crust out here that we haven't mapped, that we haven't studied, that we don't know about maybe. So it's always a learning experience to see a new earthquake pop up in an area that's wait a minute, what's going on here? So 6-pointer along the San Andreas Fault, very common, some higher, but okay. So prior to this 6-pointer, we did have some earthquake activity up here along the Cascadia subduction zone, and that's just right up here along this locked area. Here's where it starts to subduct, the North American plate interaction here with the Juan de Fuca plate. Juan de Fuca plate being shoved kind of towards the east, down underneath the North American plate here. We got this major subduction zone that sits off the coast of Northern California all the way up past the Vancouver Island ranges. And it's been a pretty fun topic of mine. I like to cover the Cascadia a lot. And I do think that thing has a possibility of it rupturing here in our lifetime. It's been 322 years since the last major rupture of the Cascadia. But we did see a 2.9, just I think it was just a few minutes prior to the 6-pointer out there in the Pacific Ocean. And then we've seen some activity kind of ramping up following that 6-pointer inland into the North American plate, right around Arizona and New Mexico. We had a pair of threes kick up here just a short time after that 6-pointer off the coast of California. 3.1 and a 3.0, kind of just back to back there. There's a couple different fault systems out here around Arizona and New Mexico, but basically that activity kind of made me think, what's going on out here? There's a lot of great pressure along the North American plate and the Pacific plate boundary if we're seeing all this intraplate earthquake activity away from these zones. And so I'm still leaving the earthquake watch up here for the West Coast for today, because I still think we have a possibility of seeing things kind of ramp up along these areas that we're kind of watching, the San Andreas Fault for one, and potentially the Cascadia. Just too much activity to ignore currently in those zones. All right, so let's go ahead and start up here along the Pacific Northwest. A little bit of activity throughout Mount St. Helens. That's it's a volcano up there, but occasionally we see some microquakes, and that's kind of been the deal for the past few months, on and off around Mount St. Helens, Mount Rainier as well, and more recently down here in Northern California around Mount Lassen. We'll check out all the volcano web recorders here in just a little bit as far as the data goes. But there's that 2.9 along the Cascadia subduction zone down there at about 22 kilometers deep into this area. Further down dip here and further east as you go across the land is going to be deeper, so to speak, on this subduction zone. And the tremor tends to happen around 35, 45 kilometers deep. Now, the tremor activity is unlike it's not really like earthquake activity. It's just vibrational frequencies being picked up pretty much slow motion. They're pretty much slow motion earthquakes, so to speak. And these plates give off a little vibrational frequency that instruments pick up, and therefore we call them tremor. This is since about September 2nd to October 20th. We had about 12,000 epicenters of tremor. Remember, we had a pretty big deal, a pretty good event here, specifically underneath Oregon, western Oregon here, down into the Cascadia subduction zone, of course. of tremor. And it was like that for a little while. That's a lot of tremor being picked up in a short amount of time for one area. It has since come to a stop over the last couple days along the Cascadia. And I think things may be stuck here. Obviously, there's building up pressure, but I don't think we can get the tremor to pick up anymore currently. Unless we see something major, some adjustment on the opposite side of the plate, possibly, or some readjustment here along the Mendocino area and into the San Andreas Fault, possibly. But tremor does come and go. But right now, with this odd activity offshore and the sudden stoppage of the tremor, just got me scratching my head a little bit and keeping an eye on this area. Back to the earthquake map here. Nothing showing up around Mount Lassen currently far as earthquake activity goes. Again, we'll check out the raw data here in just a little bit. Movement around the Clear Lake volcanic field. This is very typical. Earthquake swarming here. It's just an ongoing deal with the hydrothermal operations out here. They're creating power by injecting raw sewage down below. Don't believe me? Go check it out. It's a really interesting article and kind of a gross process. But hey, they're I guess they're using their heads to think of ways to create energy, and that's one of them. Go check out the Calpine hydrothermal operations in the Clear Lake volcanic fields of California. Right around San Jose at 2.8. This earthquake coming in looks like earlier this morning time frame, about 4 o'clock in the morning. And after the 6-pointer that we've seen off the coast. A little bit of activity around the Parkfield section of the San Andreas Fault here, 1.4. I was just down there too a couple days ago checking out the specific faults and some creep built, or what's the word I'm looking for? Some seismic creep along this zone here. Couple different instruments you can monitor to see that. Also some activity down here just off the, it kind of looks like it's right there on the San Andreas Fault, looks like. This one coming in too, around the Pine Mountain Club, 1.1. So a little bit of activity and uptick following that 6-pointer off the coast overnight. So that's why I'm leaving up the earthquake watch. I still think things are under quite a bit of stress in this area. Let me go to the 2.5 and above. Most of the activity was up north. Is there another earthquake in there? Looks like there was one hiding, but doesn't look like it. So one earthquake into the Nevada area, 2.1 inland near the Indian Springs area. And also we've been noticing a little bit of swarming up here around the north of Salt Lake City into northern Utah, up against this mountain range here near Ogden and Logan area. A little bit of swarming kicking up, 2.7 and 1.6. And Yellowstone National Park, a lot of times this area will swarm like crazy when we have a lot of pressure out here along the North American and the Pacific Plate boundary. Right up against, this is all the deformed land out here over the millions of years, right up against the relatively stable area of the North American core called the North American Craton. This area does not see a whole lot of plate dynamics in terms of movement, different faults. There's not a whole lot out here in this area of the North American Plate. That's why they call it North American Craton. Excuse me, losing my voice there. But a lot of times we do see activity under the pressure here from the west, right up against this region, and Yellowstone is one of them that sees quite a bit of swarms. But let's see what we got. Let me check out the Yellowstone seismographs here, and yeah, we're swarming. We are swarming. A couple different. Well, why did I click on that one for? It's wanting this one, Norris Junction. Couple other stations here within the last few hours showing some good size swarming kicking off there at Yellowstone. Now these are not big earthquakes at all, but I don't believe the USGS is showing them, are they? Let's see, last earthquake was a 1.9 at, let's see what the UTC time is here. UTC time is going to be, well, look at that. 17, 17, 17. Goodness. Hey, maybe I better play some lottery numbers tonight. So we're looking for that 1.9 at that timestamp. 1717 is probably going to be right about here for a 1.9. So they're only picking maybe 1 out of 5 or 10 earthquakes that kick off here at Yellowstone National Park and reporting them on the graph. Sometimes these earthquakes are hard to pinpoint as far as their exact depth, location, and magnitude. So it does have to be looked at by a professional seismologist, geologist, and then they can put it out to the earthquake catalog, which is the USGS. But there's definitely some earthquake activity. The raw data shows us that, and it looks like it's centered right around Norris Junction. And if that's the case, it appears maybe the swarm may be migrating a little bit. I say swarm because we've had a couple months here of almost continuous earthquake activity on any given day. Again, nothing large, but 10, 20 earthquakes here and there each day. And the swarming location has been within this area, right around the Maple Creek area, Madison River, Purple Mountain region. But looking at this graph here, looks like this station right here, Norris Junction, is the one that's picking it up the strongest, the more sharpest, as far as that image goes when we're looking for seismograph signatures. So we'll keep an eye on that, see if that is moving or not. There is the 6-pointer on the map from last night, off the coast of off the coast of the California area. Notice that showed up pretty significantly across the quite a few park seismographs here. All right, rest of the country. Aside from this movement here around Arizona and New Mexico, our typical areas around Pecos, Oklahoma, even one earthquake up in Kansas, a 2.6 out here. Kind of curious to see what may be out here in this region. There is some fault systems out here in Kansas. Kansas does have some earthquake history. But looking at, I was just looking to see if I can see any maybe oil pumping operations out here in this area of Kansas, but I'm not seeing any. Let's check out the U.S. hazard map. It's not really necessarily in a zone that can see or that will see any type of major seismic activity, according to the USGS anyway, as far as the hazard map goes. Notice here on the map, specific areas are marked. New Madrid zone, certain areas of Oklahoma around the Arbuckle Mountains. South Carolina is an intraplate earthquake zone, meaning that their earthquakes occur a ways away from the plate boundary. In this case, the North American plate, along with the Caribbean plate down here, well inland. So these zones do get earthquakes from time to time. But Kansas, I don't know what's causing that little earthquake out there. All right, let's see. Rest of the country, pretty quiet. Speaking of the New Madrid zone, looks like a 1.4 and a 0.9 within that area, right smack dab in the main New Madrid zone there. Just letting us know that it's still alive and one day will produce another big earthquake. Some movement outside of Puerto Rico, looks like, in their swarming area. No major uptick or noticeable movement around the Puerto Rico Trench currently. South America region, looks like we did see some activity kick up following that 6-pointer last night. This 4.6 over here into the Peru area followed that 6-pointer. So we've seen a wide swath here of noticeable increasing activity following that 6-pointer last night. So I still think we need to watch this zone pretty closely. We haven't really seen any major movement here to the west that could temporarily give us some relief out here along these areas that are showing sizable stress. Let's see what we got here. 5.3 into the Chile area. That one coming in yesterday. We did have another earthquake overnight, about 7 o'clock in the morning, a 6.1 earthquake into the South Sandwich Islands area, about 10 kilometers deep. Still within that, kind of looked like it made its way down in this fashion. Seen activity kind of ramping up here first, then through this area, now down into the South Sandwich Trench area. Either way, definitely watch this closely today. Hawaii, seen some activity as well. This earthquake here came in just after the 6-pointer. I always look for some odd movement following earthquakes, whether they're large or an unusual earthquake in a certain zone. And I was watching areas following this unusual 6-pointer last night. And for example, Arizona was one of them. The Cascadia earthquake up here, the little 2-pointer, was one as well. The Peru earthquake. Things started to get really busy following this 6.0 earthquake. And Hawaii was also one of them. Had a 2.9 at 62 kilometers deep. Pretty deep earthquake, and in an odd area. Haven't really seen too much earthquake activity here, specifically within this area, within the zone of the Pacific. And it's still, unfortunately, it's still under automatic status. And I was hoping they would review it. I'm not for sure why they haven't already. It's obviously late afternoon or early afternoon here along the West Coast, but it's still standing as an automatic status, meaning that we don't know if it's legit or not. It may not be a real earthquake. It could have been triggered from the seismic wave of the 6.0. So we'll wait and see if they get to it or not. Maybe they're busy. 2.1 up at the top of Mauna Loa. I still think we need to watch that very closely. Not a whole lot of swarming currently going on there, but something to watch. Around Pahala area as well. That's very typical. Nothing going on around the Lohi Seamount right now. Over here around the Western Pacific, got looks like a 5.1. That one coming in yesterday. And some other earthquake activity around the Philippine plate here. Looks like the latest one, early this morning, a 5.0. About 43 kilometers deep. A little spotty activity yesterday throughout the north of the Himalayas and then to China and eastern Afghanistan as well. Seen some activity yesterday. The Atlantic up here, North Atlantic area. Most of this movement here from yesterday, late last night. We did have one this morning, a 4.2 in the Norwegian Sea area. 5 o'clock in the morning, that earthquake struck. All right, so let's see what we got going on here for the Mount Lassen area. I know we have been looking at a little bit of swarming, a little bit of stress up here around this volcano. I don't believe it's volcanic in nature, but I believe there's some faults up here that were under quite a bit of stress, indicating definitely some stress along the west coast. And let's see if I can get this to bring up here. And so we had noticed a pretty good swarm of activity. If you haven't watched my update videos on this swarm, there are a couple videos back. Here is the 6-pointer that struck off the coast here of California last night. Looks like some S waves traveling in there following the primary wave. As far as earthquake activity goes, it's looking pretty spotty now. A couple days ago, we had a pretty good swath of earthquake activity. There are a lot of small microquakes kicking up here that day. But it has since kind of died off. I'm not seeing anything really major as far as earthquake activity goes. Just a couple small little specks up here on the graph. And that's about it. But we'll still keep an eye on that and see how that goes. Solar weather activity looks like maybe kicking up around the KP index at 4 today. Currently at 4 on the KP index chart, indicating some potential auroras there. Looks like around Russia area, northern Russia. Maybe we'll get to that around our region later tonight. Looks like Greenland and Iceland as well getting in on some potential auroras, which is pretty cool. Solar sunspot activity. See what the latest image looks like today. And gosh darn it, don't really have anything major working here. Potentially this sunspot here is getting a little bit of development of some specific magnetic fields here. Structure is looking a little bit better than what it was last night. These other ones, not so much. And that is a shame. 3136. So let me see what we got for 3136. I believe that's just going to harbor a beta magnetic class currently, but this was put out here a couple days ago, so may be updated. 20% chance of a C flare from that area, it looks like. Overall, 55% chance for a C flare, 10% chance for an M flare, and 1% for the X flare and proton probabilities. But nothing drastic, nothing major in store for the sunspots currently. All right, folks, I'm going to jump off here. Have a good day. We will chat you guys a little bit later. Again, leaving up the earthquake watch for the West Coast for now, following the unusual activity there off the California coast last night. New Zealand area does have some movement as well. I noted, or I forgot to mention, the earthquake activity kind of kicking up down here overnight. Some deeper movement and also some shallow activity as well in the probably about the mid-4 range. Currently on the Kermadec Trench. That's a little spot we're watching, a little bit of noticeable increase there. But I think we're kind of at the neutral zone right now for that teeter-totter effect. But definitely keep an eye on the West Coast. That includes California, Oregon, Washington, areas around the Eastern Pacific Ring of Fire here. It just seems like it's under quite a bit of stress recently. All right, folks, have a good day. We'll catch you guys a little bit later on tonight for the nightly update. Peace out.